Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first lecture in the Studio Art Department's Winter Lecture Series. I'm Gerald Otten, and I direct the Artist in Residence program. Before we begin, could everybody turn their electrical devices off, please? Also, before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the Black Family Visual Arts Center, where we gather today, is situated upon the ancestral and unceded lands of the Abenaki people. Sheila Pepe, our winter artist in residence, was born in Morristown, New Jersey, and lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. She received a BFA in ceramics from Massachusetts School of Art in Boston and an MFA from the School of the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. She's best known for crocheting her large-scale ephemeral installations and sculpture made from domestic and industrial materials. Inspired by feminist artists such as Linda Benglis, Eva Hesse, Nancy Spiro, who were a generation or two older than her, Pepe, as a young artist, began responding to issues of gender, queer identity, class, and civil rights, among many other things, community. Right. She studied blacksmithing at the Haystack Mountain School of Crafts, Deer Isle, Maine, and received a fellowship to attend the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. She's had numerous solo and group exhibitions, including the Des Moines Arts Center, the ICA Boston, Santa Barbara Contemporary Arts Forum, University Gallery at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, Witherspoon Art Museum, North Carolina, Wexner Center for the Arts in Columbus, Ohio. She contributed to Liquid Sky 2007, which was on view at MoMA PS1. Research Station for the People 2014 was included in the 8th pronunciation here, Shenzhen Sculpture Biennial in China. Sheila Pepe, Hot Mess Formalism. The artist's mid-career survey was organized by the Phoenix Art Museum and traveled to Everson Museum of Art in Syracuse, the Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts in Omaha, and the DeCordova Sculpture Park and Museum in Lincoln. Tabernacle for Trying Times 2021, an exhibition with painter Carrie Moyer, was organized by Portland Museum of Art in Maine and traveled to the Museum of Arts and Design in New York. Pepe's work is in private and public collections, including Zimmerle Art Museum, Rutgers University, the Rose Art Museum at Brandeis, Smith College Museum of Art, and Harvard University Art Museums. Last summer, any New Yorkers here, you might have seen this, she installed 15,000 yards of crocheted material to create the mind-blowing My Neighbor's Garden at Madison Square Park in New York City. Hillary Sheets did an article in the New York Times, and the title of the article for the project states, "Imagine Spider-Woman with a crochet hook." I really like that. Sheila, thank you for coming, and please welcome Sheila Pepe. Oh, and join us for a reception right after the talk, right out this door in the gallery.
It's okay.
This is my important job.
I like that part. Hi. Thank you, Jerry. I'm in good hands with this guy.
There you go.
Thanks for bringing me up here. You know, we know about this place down in Brooklyn. We know that a lot of our friends and colleagues have come up here, and I'm delighted to be here. And I'll just get started. When I first started talking about my work, I did a lot of it. I did a lot of talking about my work. And over the years, I've kind of hopefully stripped things back, and I'll say a few things. But I'm hoping very much to do this in such a way that there's a lively question and answer, that it tell you enough that you'll have some questions. I won't fill you up with too much information so that you just leave kind of bloated in between your ears and thinking, well, now I don't have anything. So if you know my work, you know that I've been making room size to monumental, crocheted, and now knit and knotted installations for, well, since the late 90s, starting in Boston. And what I'm showing you now are a series of works from the moment that I moved back to the New York area. Having grown up in Jersey, I told a lot of people that it took me 20 years and a trip to Massachusetts to cross the river from New Jersey to New York, because I spent those 20 years in Boston, then in Western Mass, and then back in Boston. So I did a lot of my young adult growing up, and much of it without any art at all, in Massachusetts. And so I'm happy, even though this is further up, I'm happy to be back in New England. So I'm not going to say much. I'm just going to let you look. This is work that started in 2000, a year or so after I got into town. This is all crocheted yarn. There's a correspondence between the shadows that are made by the yarn and the drawings that are in the shadows on the wall. What you might be missing here is that the industrial rubber bands were opened up on site. And so one of the biggest things in the room, is a very big room, was the smell of rubber. I should have a scratch and sniff for you all. I like language, and often I'll use words that will double in meaning. So this gallery, this was a group exhibition, and this gallery section that I had was literally a kind of quarter lap of the space, the rounded end. And almost every one of these components that you see knotted together to make the whole were made in my lap, literally, in a big oversized chair. And I just, crochet as fast and as intuitively as possible, and then throw it in a big box to have it FedExed to the site. So when it was time for me to return to the site and deinstall this piece so it could be packed properly, well, what was properly? It's not like the thing can break, but take responsibility for packing it up. It was the weekend after 9/11, so I was grounded, and other people packed it up for me, which was very nice. But suddenly all of the work got horizontal for a while. And the color of the work at this point is, because I'm thinking of all of this work as drawings in space. And this, for example, is maybe a 20 feet or 30 feet depth you're looking into. This one's more like 20 feet depth you're looking into. And I'm interested in how all of that collapses in a different, from vista to vista, and how it reads as a fixed drawing, but also as a drawing in space. So as time goes on, I always do different things in the studio at the same time. So something like this, where I'm working really hard to show you that this can't get out of that space without destroying it. you can't remove the rubber band, the large rubber bands around the pole without cutting something. And I'm sort of pressing on other artists and other people to notice how things get made. Everything is made with the craft that you might be familiar with. If not, you could ask your grandma, or they're just knots and you know what a knot is. And these are all shoelaces, as are the earlier works after Josephine. So there's a real interest on my part to work handmade things, handmade ready-mades, and make the process as transparent as possible. And I'm also working with an aesthetic conclusion of the work. How do I know it's finished? That's being pulled right out of mid-century, mid-20th century modernism. So that kind of syncopated, sort of asymmetrical, resolving the rectangular space with something that's not symmetrical. That's what I grew up with. That's the formal, quote unquote, modernism. That was the mystery of my youth. They tell you whether it worked or not. That works. That doesn't work, Jill. That one works. And I would always wonder, what does that mean? What does working mean? What is the criteria there for something being good and working well and not? So it's a language that I keep going back to. I also become very aware of a desire to replicate the process. And as things go into space and come back to me and get sort of culled for all the cut parts and reused like a sourdough, and next everything gets reused and taken apart and put it back together, that I want to replicate that system, if you will, that set of rules in other work. So I'm very aware that I'm making something, I'm cutting it apart, and I'm putting it back together. And I'm watching, especially in something as simple as this, part of the New York Drawings series, that I'm just really just making something, cutting it down the middle, swapping sides, and then using a technique you'd use for wallpaper to seam everything exactly together. So there's optically a difference, but there's, if you ran your finger over the top of that piece of paper, it wouldn't feel like a collage. You'd sense a little slot, little ding in the paper, but it would be plainer, would be completely one sheet. And so it's obviously trickery. I don't want to show you, I don't want to say it's not trickery, but it's a kind of trickery that's meant to hide something. And I think that's a really important difference in terms of the kinds of structures that make a collage or a bricolage. So for a while, I showed with Susan Inglet in New York when she was in Soho, and it worked for a great time until it didn't, until she was surprised when I wanted to leave. But this is kind of key to my practice, is that I simply didn't want to have someone crafting my career. I didn't want somebody to say, well, this is not as prestigious as it needs to be for your next show, so you shouldn't do it. I always wanted to just do what people invited me to do. And if it worked and it seemed interesting to me, and especially if the architecture was interesting to me, I was there. If it didn't work, and my rules for many years was, I just can't lose money. Sometimes I'd need to make more money. Somebody was teaching, and there are other kinds of gigs coming in, so I could do something at a school or somewhere that didn't really have much money. I just say, okay, I can't lose any money, but it'll be fun to do. And I think that's one of the best decisions I ever made, because it meant that I got to do a lot of different things. So this is 2003. I'm becoming aware of signaling through color, the use of color, what's in my environment. So this is under the F&G, which is F&G train in New York. At Smith and 9th Street was where my studio was at the time. And if any of you know that part of Brooklyn, it's the highest point of the MTA. So if you're climbing up, it's almost like a roller coaster, click, click, click. If you're climbing up that curve on the F or the G train, and you look back, you can see the front of the Statue of Liberty. And so it's quite amazing to know, like, oh, we're getting south here. We're getting on to Long Island now. And there was a lot of, the underneath of that section of a very tall support structure was spalling, that's a technical term. Little bits of concrete were falling off, like several stories down onto the sidewalk and onto the road. So they had the most beautiful, really hardcore, like some kind of weird fabric. It wasn't fabric, but it was fabric, holding up all this stuff until they fixed it. So that idea of looking up to something that was catching industrial waste of a certain kind was going to save the people from being knocked on the head. And the other thing is that this idea of things falling from the sky was still in my mind as far as 9/11 happening, and not so consciously, but at a certain point, the title of this show is going to be Feminism, funerals, and one more F thing. I like alliteration because of that color purple. That purple was for, in my youth, that's the color socks you'd wear with your Birkenstocks to make sure that everybody knew that you were part of the Lavender Menace. And then in New York at that time, there was funeral bunting everywhere in every firehouse and other places. And so it didn't. It went back to the familiar place of the infrastructure of New York City that I was witness to differently because of 9/11, but also had come home to it and still feeling like in the digital avant-garde, I still had time to appreciate the 20th century New York that I had missed for most of my youth. So these drawings are all put together the same way now, a bit more complex, and they sit beside the installations. They're happen before the installations, but as a drawing on paper with color. And they really don't have anything to do with the installation as it's made, but they're a kind of practice, or a kind of, practice for solving a problem of composing something in space, in flat space. So at that highest point in the MTA, there's also a lift bridge for the Gowanus Canal, where small boats go through, mostly what what on TV they might call a tug, but is known as a pilot boat or pilot. They're the guys that get behind the big tankers and drive them up the river. And I was standing there waiting for the bridge to come back down, and I saw this most beautiful, big, fat tow line in the back of this boat. And It's like, that's my next material. So while I'm looking for both materials that are referencing a situation in life at large, something already made in the Duchampian sensibility that is also something that you would be able to name with the word, I'm using those components as formal, for their formal characteristics, that their lines and their colors and their found colors, and then I'm making drawings in space with them. I'm trying to infuse, or I'm trying to, I'm not trying to, I'm actually, I'm basically saying all that formalism was always made out of something you know. It's not blank material with no identity and no socioeconomic or political content. It's always been, all things have a degree of political content. And when you situate them in the world, in commerce, in a neighborhood, where can you buy it? Who do you talk to when you buy it? What does it mean for me to prefer to work with vendors who have nothing to do with the art world? You know, why does an artist make that kind of decision rather than work with other materials? That's always embedded in the work. So you see the materials getting reused. And in this case, this space, the local information about this space at UMass is that there's an anniversary of installation work at UMass at Amherst in what was called the gallery, is now called the museum. And one of my mentors, Judy Pfaff, had done a piece in that. It's a space with two entryways. It's subterranean, so you have these steps down on both sides. And her piece was called Boa, like the snake. And you went down one side and through it like you're being digested by the boa, with this great optical experience and physical experience, kind of winding your way through it and out the other side. And my response was to kind of arrest you, hopefully optically, but literally, physically, by creating a barrier. You can't go through it. You can't go through the other side. And, you know, is my desire with this work, with all of it probably, is to slow you down now more than ever, because we were slower then. We were quite capable of, when it was 2005, looking at things for a longer period of time without any distractions, because there was no, phone. We were just a lot more tolerant of, I think, generally looking at, really long videos with no sound, or stopping and standing in front of an object and literally trying to figure out, what is that? How did it get made? What are the decisions the artist made? Which I think is the most important thing you can do when you look at someone else's work and your own. So in time, I'm kind of really skipping a lot here. So all of those things were made and are now gone, and they just live as photographs. And some have more photographs than others. Some are in a book, which is very wonderful, because books are great. They're a thing. This is one in a series of things that it's called the Common Sense series. I began wanting to know what would happen if someone else were given the task, or a bunch of someone else's were given the task of taking the work apart. Usually it is someone else who's taking the work apart, but taking the work apart with the purpose of them reusing the materials and making something out of it, not me. Like, I would no longer save the stuff and reuse it for other instances. I would, it's an experiment. You know, what is my desire? My desire is that everything gets used up. All of the red, and I picked like very nice quality fingerling, small stuff, because there's a young mothers group that will come to this, and they will learn how to, there will be a lesson for them to learn how to crochet, and this is perfect for babies and all that stuff. But this is another cocktails and crochet event that that the museum did. And there's a lot of learning, which is great. Like each time something a bit different happens. And one of the best things that happens during these events is that people learn how to crochet. And that this desire for, you know, the extension of something that is familiar in a museum, or that, yes, that is familiar and in a museum, is something that's going to happen for the audience. Is it a perfect experiment? No. It in a funny way, it just keeps failing in these wonderful ways. The work is never completely consumed. A lot of times there's stuff left over at the end, and it all gets wound up and given to someone. I don't know where it goes, because I'm home and it's being taken down without me. But this idea that through the work, you'd be able to come into the museum and see something that you could crochet from. It's like a tree you can take the fruit off of, and or see kind of half taken apart, like imperfect. Like it was perfect at the beginning, and then people took things apart, and now it's kind of gangly, and they look sort of good, and then they're by chance not looking as I would have intended. This idea of making space, like the show in Shenzhen that we mentioned, this is from Parlor for the People that Carrie and I collaborated on in the show in Portland, Maine, which was open for a couple of weeks, and then COVID happened. But behind, you'll see a big field of operation for Another Common Sense, a series of events. The museum in Portland has an incredible education department, and I adore education departments in museums. I don't know if that's, a lot of artists feel that way, but it is truly where people who don't necessarily feel like it's their thing, or they don't know what to think, or it's a place where, you know, people like me can gain access. Why do I say that? People like me means when I was a kid, we got in the buses from Jersey, and we went with our teachers to the Met and to the Modern and to the Whitney, and looked at art, and our teachers and people from the museums talked to us about it, and we were given access in ways that I would have never been able to figure out on my own, nor would my parents have. It's just not in their, it was not in their bandwidth, it's just not. So, you know, that's a particular era that in the 60s and 70s that is not without problems, but the Rockefeller era idea of Americans getting culture was expansive and changed my path in a considerable way. So these kids are way more sophisticated than I was. I'm sure that's, you know, they're in there with the curator, and they're completely, you can see, at ease and sitting in the chairs that I designed and waiting to crochet, and then of course the whole thing got shut down. So this idea of bringing people into the process and bringing the process to the people, the desire to use crocheting as a lure, if you will, to bring folks who are familiar with handcrafts and not just handcrafts, but something my mother taught me how to do. I didn't learn how to crochet in art school. I wasn't a fiber major. I just picked it because one day I realized that all of the very successful other women artists my age were referencing men, all men, to say that their work was after so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and they were all men. And still, I could say, but your work is really coming from, someone could say, is coming from this woman and this woman, and these are all these precedents made by women, and you're not mentioning them. So it was really my desire to throw a wrench into the system. And this was before even crocheting was a thing. It was knitting at the time, in 2000, because crochet was too lowbrow. And, you know, knitting is more northern, it's more Anglo, it's for these kind of climates. Knitting, crocheting is not necessarily for this climate. Most of knitting comes from the South, where you can make open, lacy things for year-round. Okay, so I got this amazing email inviting me a year or so ago to do something in Madison Square Park in New York City, which is an incredible site for public sculpture, something I've never done before this summer. So, you know, you can ask me all kinds of questions about it later, but yes, I did it. And as requested, I used the materials that I'm sort of known for, but I had to massage it all or engineer it all to be outside from June until December, the first week of December. So everything was made out of shoelaces and shoelace material and paracord, because those materials are engineered to get wet and dry and to be outside. So, you know, people would come up to me and say, Sheila, it's going to get wet. And I'd be like, yeah, it is. You know, like I don't know if you get the humor in that. It's like, duh, like, what do you think? What do you think I'm doing over here? So it became a big raucous drawing in space with some labial moves over there. There are a few tchotch mamas hanging around here and there. But there was a real interest on my part to marry the installation to the architecture of the site. If it wasn't architecture that was literally existing, because I couldn't, well, we do to the lampposts a little bit, but that I would make these poles, we made the poles to appear as if they lived there. And the architecture for me was the program of the place was growing things, because it's conservancy. And so I worked with the horticulture team to create these beds of climbers. We had heirloom tomatoes, we had beans, and all kinds of crazy flowers that I don't know the name of. And the horticulture team was absolutely amazing. And made their, they have an educational program too. So we had the art and the horticulture working kind of side by side, back and forth, using the place to make a different kind of art, a different kind of public sculpture than I've seen. I mean, and this is the same thing I'm trying to do inside, I'm doing outside. And what I realize is doing it outside, I don't have to try to lure an audience inside. They're walking down the street. They're cutting through the park. That's their park. And they either like it or they don't like it. And I mean, I had an incredible response from a variety of people. And the way you could tell is people will take photographs of it and put it up on Instagram or something, and mostly on Instagram. Or I will eavesdrop, and then nobody knows who I am, nor do they care, which is fantastic. And so, it's a fabulous thing. I wanted to know if the plantings would consume the crocheting, and it starts to. And by time the season is over, you can see if our growing season was longer, it would just keep going, and I would be, without any materials left. But it goes so far. That's the beginning. I think we're reversing things. You saw the end of the season. Here's the beginning of the season. And then here's the very end of the season. Right before it comes down in December, it looks like there was a lifespan to this artwork, which is exactly what I believe in, that, nothing really lasts forever, and we can make it last forever if we try really hard to conserve it, and there's a lot of conservation going on, and I think that's wonderful. I love conservation. But that we think about how we take up public space differently is probably a good idea. I would say, especially as, somebody with European descent, my people have been taking up, I'm Southern Italian, so those Romans been taking up space forever. We're still digging their stuff up. Like what we made America on a kind of visual we've made our own myths of the visual of Greek and Roman architecture and statuary. So for me, it's thinking about that space of how long am I going to be with you as a work of art, as the work of art as a surrogate, but also being open to looking at death as a viable topic in ways that aren't necessarily gruesome, but just real. I mean, it's, this is going to sound like a very dark talk. I started at the beginning talking about 9/11, and now I'll talk about COVID. But in my mind, they're kind of bookends to a period of time. And we know it's always going on around us, but we're not of an age when we're encouraged to think about it as just a natural thing. I think living out here, if you have a garden or, you see animals on the side of the road, or you're a little bit more cued into it than you would be in the city where, maybe there's occasionally a bird that's hit a window, or a squirrel has fallen out of a tree, or rats, where you're like, yay! Sorry. But there's this thing about when materials change and when we change and how we change is something to cherish, something to consider, and I guess part of my work at this time. So now I'm just going to kind of quickly take you back to here. And I'm doing this just to kind of fill out the back end of the studio. What's always happening in the studio otherwise? This is the beginning, 1994. This is the work that I sort of came out into the world with. This literally is some of the work that got me into Skowhegan. There's the object. There's the light, the shadow. Everything is made by somebody who has serious ADD, like 15 minutes, 10 minutes. That's what that looks like in all light. And then this is what we now would call a mind map, which is just how I thought before we knew that they were mind maps. Like before the internet, I had to kind of argue to myself that this was okay, that thinking this way was okay. And I don't know if that makes any difference anymore, but this idea that comes from Wittgenstein about family resemblances, where you have categories that are not fixed, but akin to each other because of their similarities and their differences, that there's kind of pressurized system of things being like each other in various ways. So that I'm constantly, literally taking my work apart and putting it back together as different kinds of work. So from the Doppelganger series, the drawings get taken out and go in another direction, which I haven't really shown you much of here. And the objects get taken out and go in their own direction. And I make them as something I call votive moderns, because the sculpture that I knew growing up was about this big and sat on your dresser or your bedside table, and it was like the Madonna, Jesus with the sacred, Jesus with the Sacred Heart thing going on, or it's Crown of Thorns, or an Infant of Prague. They were all little religious things, because that's what Josephine put around the house. There was a bust of Mozart on the piano, but I don't think it had as much meaning for her as those other things. And so we took them to be sculpture, like serious. So I've been making these things since 1994. Different things, there will be these groups that are their own set of different things. And then I will put, as you will see here, a collection of stuff from different eras together. And so most of these things are now in other collections, like this and this one is in the Des Moines collection, and this one is at Smith with some other things. That's at Phoenix with some other things. So these are the things that last for the most part now. There are some other works but this is a point in my life where I want to kind of come out as someone who makes things that I want to last. And you can explain that in a variety of ways. I would say it's my age. And the things that is the most kind of comical thing about it is that for years, people have asked me, oh, are these models for bigger sculptures? And I'd say, no way. These are exactly what they are. These are this size. This is true. And I would take solace in the fact that I knew there were a whole collection of small tabletop sculptures made by lots of different sculptors in the collection at Smith. And I would go visit them because mostly they were in storage. Like nobody really wanted to put them out. There wasn't a place for tabletop things in the big canon. They were gifts from alumni, as most of that collection is, and they were likely things that people bought to put in their home because they weren't going to buy a huge Chamberlain's crushed car sculpture to put on their piano. It was just, they didn't live that way. They weren't, they bought art, but it was art you could live with, And I think the critical art world has made a lot of fun of that genre. And in the same way, I want to use stuff that my mother taught me how to do. I want to honor art that you can just live with without, because a lot of us are just like that. I can't get big things in my apartment. So these are the last few things that I've shown recently at Marinaro Gallery, where I was in a group show. But so these things go on, and I've shown you some of the precursors to some things you'll see in the gallery. And just, as a footnote to this entire talk, and because it's time for me to stop, is this, just so you know that once upon a time, I did make video. And I love the moving image. And I just got one of those new iPhones, so I'm with a lot of memory. So I'm excited to watch out, you might be in one of my videos. I promise I'll have you sign something first, okay? But this is my idea of a painting. If you can't figure it out, I've always really loved painting more. No, it's not. It's true, it's not true. I'm married to a painter, so I've got enough painting. But this is my painting that's not a painting, that's also a moving image. And I'll give it to you in my own version of animation. So that's the installation. There you go. I feel like I've skated in a couple of different areas without really explaining that much. I guess that was my goal. Being here where there are so many super smart people, I hope to get questions. Now, anything,
I got a mic.
it's my rule, you can ask me anything. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. That was amazing. I was wondering if you see your work to be in relation, or maybe not in relation, to yarn bombing.
Yeah, not really, but I like yarn bombing. I mean, I remember when, actually I just started the Common Sense series, and the first one was in Houston, not at that venue, but another venue in Houston, and there was a local woman there who was like, I'm a yarn bomber. I'm like, great. And she was like, I think we were gonna have like a cage match or something. I didn't know what was going on, but it was like, oh, there's this whole thing coming up where it's the yarn bombers are really taking a position way outside of the art world, but also kind of like, it's an interesting question around all this craft. So it's like, we're outside the art world, but we want to be inside of the art world. I get that. And my way of answering that is, I just want to be inside of the art world with this package of goods that doesn't come from art necessarily. I know how to speak your language, but the stuff that I want to show up with didn't come from an art store. Like came from home. You know, it's like weird. Like they probably teach crocheting now, but when I was a kid, going to art schools and stuff, it was like, crochet? What are you, nuts? We weave. I used to hang out with those people. They're like, no, we're weavers. And I was like, okay. You know, it's like saying, I paint in oils. You know, not that acrylic stuff. Now acrylic paint is everywhere, right? So I think it's great. I like the guerrilla part of it. I'm not that fast. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much. I think a really interesting thing that you talked about that I haven't heard a lot of artists talk about before is the accessibility to methods, being able to look at something and say, I don't know how that was made, but I can see the handwork in it.
Yeah.
And then at other times you said, you know, I'm joining these pieces of paper in this really subtle way. Do you know when you're starting how you want it to, how visible you want the handwork to be in the end, or?
No, you know, I have to say, my work, when I first started to figure out how I work and could describe it after I did it, it was the only way I could figure out what I was doing. I'd make something and then I'd find language for it. And then that became a kind of feedback loop that was so good, I could do things without any language intervening. But they were based on ideas about deconstruction, about inclusion. I mean, I could see where they were sitting in the world as a strategy. But I like processes that, like anybody that's ever hung wallpaper would be able to look at that and say, oh, I know what she just did. Other people who have their wallpaper hung by somebody else won't. So I think that's perfect. You know, like if you've done something before, it's like, I don't know, watching somebody who's never shoveled snow before shovel snow, and you're like, you don't need that, just get a broom. Like, right? You know what I mean? It's that kind of knowledge being thread through the canon to shift the canon. And it comes from having, it comes from having coming from these peasants from southern Italy, where experience was more more important to my grandparents than education. When I left for college, my grandmother said, "What?" She was crying hysterically. "What are they going to teach you that I can't teach you?" And I was like, "I don't know what it is, Grandma, but I think it's in books." Like, I don't know. I've just got to go. I got to leave. But she's right. I mean, I didn't learn how to make her cavatelli. I didn't learn how to make all these things. I didn't know how to. She knew everything. I didn't learn how to butcher meat. I didn't like all this stuff. So, you know, I tried to get a little both, but well, like when I was in Western Mass, but I didn't do it with my family, which was good. I did it with farmers from Ashfield who said very little. It was perfect. Because you just watch and learn and do. And that's your street cred. Yeah. It's like answered you too much maybe, but okay, cool.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for the presentation. I was curious for your indoor installations, what drew you specifically to the materiality of shoelaces?
Partly because they were just in my junk drawer. Like like all of those early things were the materials and the doppelganger things that then became the votive moderns. It's real. Like I have boxes of junk from the 90s that I carefully preserved, and like I just love bits of junk, bigger junk. And I had a whole bunch of shoelaces, and then I went to materials for the arts with somebody and I got a whole bunch of shoelaces, and then I was like, oh, my grandfather, my father's father and all of his brothers had shoe repair shops. My grandfather had a shoe repair shop in Lower Manhattan. That's now the entrance to the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. I know. And because Josephine is my mother's name, and that piece was kind of, I was returning and I was like, oh, I have ties. There's a narrative here for me to tie, literally, no joke, tie into. So we have Josephine with the crocheting. We'll do Frank's side with the shoelaces. And so it just became this incredible material because, please bear with me for a minute because I get all excited about this. There's so many good things about it. I had to tie them end to end to end for hours. It was like the most incredibly meditative, mind-blowing, excruciating process. It was a little Catholic, even though I've been remote for a long time, an atheist for a bunch. But it was like that kind of, I need to know what this kind of work is like, again. And then it's easy to crochet. The other thing is where the knots are, because I was so focused on the shadows, we'd light it and everything looked like crown of thorns or barbed wire, or it was like the shadow drawings were like crazy good. And then the mechanical part about it in terms of drawing was also perfect because you could reach into any part of it and erase, meaning untie a couple of shoelaces and just pull, and a whole section would be gone. I'd be like, or go back in, tie something, it'd be seamless, and then keep crocheting off in the other direction. So there was this weird, both mechanical, the material was doing things in different ways all at the same time. And I'll say, when I find a material like that, where I can read it on multiple levels, then I stick with it, or a trope of some kind, because that's the goal for me, is to have several gates to the work at once. One that's one that has a bit of a narrative or a bit of a narrative in it. One that's very post-minimalist in terms of what this stuff is and what it looks like. And one that's just really practical, that somebody who likes to look at stuff and figure out how it's made can get involved in that way. So, yeah, there's some questions back there. Thank you. Did that do it for you? I know I can really geek out on some of this stuff. Sorry if it's, hi.
Hi, thank you so much. You just mentioned the narratives in your work, and I just
Yeah.
wanted to ask you to elaborate on that a little bit. If there's like a consistent narrative, or if the narratives of your pieces are all different.
Say it again. There's a something narrative and then,
Consistent narrative between your works, or if they're all in unique and different narratives.
they're kind of all over the place. In fact, I don't know what they all are. And in a funny way, I don't think it's my job to know what they are. I think, like you are getting what I know about my work, right? And for a long time, I really pressed myself hard to know a lot about it so I could figure out how to grow with it, you know. And now I just get ideas like what I did when I was like 20, like while I'm falling asleep, while I'm waking up, they're like ping, ping, ping. It's like crazy. And they're all this constellation in my head of like moves to make and what it might mean. And the narratives that I know are thematic for me. It's about a lot about class, a lot about who's invited, who's not invited, and why, kind of stuff. About how we see in categories and where that works and where it doesn't work. You know, I don't want to tear the house down. I just really want to learn together how meaning shifts and how meaning now, again, how meaning works. I mean, I've always been interested in how meaning works and the value of meaning and the value of art as a conveyor of meaning. So the big narratives in making the work over a long period of time like the biggest one is that art is not a commodity. It's to convey meaning. It's to start a conversation. It needs people. And that can be a static object or a performed thing or, I mean, I think all you have to do is think about the very first art that you think, the very first things that you think got made in the world. And those could be rituals or objects or outfits and, you know, archaeology is so great because it's like, oh, grave goods, man. Yeah, like, it's all religion, but it's not my religion, so I don't give a shit. Like, sorry, but it's all about really caring about something and having this code that people understand or use. You'll use this on the other side. So we're going to put it in these jars and you're going to pop your heart back in and I don't know what. You know what I mean? So it's a kind of, when you look at something, the kind of effort that has been put into this, and then how do you make a connection between the making and what the meaning might be? And so language becomes imperative. Naming things, very simple use of language, becomes very important, like the most rudimentary. And I feel like we're totally not in agreement about what the meaning of a word is right now. It's like, well, what's that word mean? Oh, I'm afraid to say in public because somebody might tell me I'm wrong, you know. So it seems like now that's what the work is for. Work is to make connections with people. Otherwise, you know, there are all kinds of queer codes in it, lesbian codes in it. I'm very much about keeping the whole string and space thing is also precedents for that are, you know, lesbians who would protest by making webs in, like in old Cambridge Baptist Church when Sonia Johnson came to lecture and in all over Amherst College before it was cool to do any of this stuff. you know, so there are different precedents I'm trying to keep alive too. And I guess that's the narrative. It's kind of a mess. Somebody will figure out after I'm dead, or not. As long as they let me keep doing this, I'm fine with whatever that is.
Can we do one more question?
Sure. There are a couple of people back there who've been raising hands for a long time.
Two more questions.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask, so on your Times Square piece, you talked about preparing with like durable materials for weather, but my first thought is if you have this huge public installation in a busy park in one of the busiest cities in the world, were
Yeah.
you concerned at all about people and how they might damage the piece, and
It was
how did
up
you?
pretty high.
So it was just
no.
like beyond like reach, like nobody
Yeah,
could.
and the parts you could touch, I'm sure they touched. But they're very, I think that it's a group of people that's really used to having art around. So much so, it's very funny. Like I had this is how much I love people and are not worried about them. I brought my high school art teacher there, Catherine Cusimano, who is from Jersey, and my best friend from high school, and we had this like reunion there, which just, it's like a really big deal. And so they're taking pictures, whatever, and I'm waiting for them, and you know, I'm standing there. I'm taking a picture of them taking pictures. And this lady comes by and says, "Do you think it's really that good?" And I'm like, "I don't know, what do you think?" And she's like, "I don't know." I was like, "Is it really bad?" She's like, "Well, it's not that bad." And I said, "Well, come on, tell me, what do you think?" And she said, "Well, it'd be probably better on a skirt." And I was like, "Okay, that's fair." And I was like, "Oh, I love you. I'm not going to tell you anything, but I just got some, as they say, realness. And I would never get that in a museum, ever. You know, so I have to take it. Yeah, I don't think it really would look good on a skirt, but otherwise, we did a lot of, the team I worked with, I worked huge teams. There's a whole nother narrative about these groups that we got brought together to crochet everything, and the guys that helped, all the different teams of people who helped make this real happen. And there was a lot of chance that we tried to bear down on, that nobody would climb up there and be an idiot. They also have guards, like, they're not guards, they're just like park people, conservancy people who walk around in their conservancy clothes, like digging stuff. And so if anybody does anything weird, somebody will be with them in a second. So it's a very specialized place. That's why it's so beautiful there. It's got its own, it's a park, but it's got its own funding stream and stuff. But yeah, I hope not to worry about people. Okay. Hi.
Oh, thank you so much. And
Yeah.
I really appreciate what you said about making art that you could live with, and I guess like all the site-specific thing you do, and how your art is about connection. I'm just wondering, without that, like, how do you conceptualize putting your work in galleries, and how it is activated in gallery in similar way? And
Yeah.
I mean, you just talk about museums and stuff, and you know, as artists, I work with institutions too that I feel
Yeah.
somehow like alienating my work
Yeah.
with
I understand.
myself, with my narrative. So I'm just wondering
So
how you deal with
I'm
that.
going to tell you something. When I went to Boston, how many people know Boston fairly well? Anybody? Yeah. All right. When I went to Boston the first time for school, I did not know that the old doors on one side, like I knew the new glass doors, you could go in and that, but I didn't know that these other things on the side that were very fancy and without windows or anything were doors. I literally, you guys, I did not have the ability to read that piece of architecture as a door. I'd never been exposed to anything like that. I don't know if anybody can relate to that, but it's my take on institutional impenetrable, institutions can be completely impenetrable, but there are always people that I've always found that will help you decode them. It's like this place. Like, are you a student or faculty here? Are you Oh, I'm a grad student. Okay, so if you can figure this place out, museum, gallery, well, that's a walk in the park, because those are places that are like, they don't have as many terms of acceptance, and they'll teach you. It's intimidating, but the thing is I got jobs in those places, and when I made it feel like a workplace, and that's how I do it. When I made it feel like a workplace and had these great people kind of introduce me to how it works, it was like a deli. And I would do things and and be afraid that I ruined something, or I would see like this little tiny nick I put in a frame once, and I'd go home, and in my dreams it was like this big, and I was terrified that I'd screwed something up. And I went back, and it was I couldn't even find it, So it's hard to penetrate these places that we are sure in our own minds don't want us, but I don't think it's true. I think it's not knowing, and not knowing is a great burden. And it's, in my view, it's not the fault of the institution. The institution is something you want. You want what you can get from that institution. If you were to change it, those things might not be there anymore. Or, I'm interested in infiltrating it in a way that makes it softer, makes it laugh at itself a little bit, makes it familiar, brings stuff from home. I'm a total nerd when it comes to the value of the canon. I have real ideas. I have pretty rigorous ideas about what art is and what it's not. That might surprise you, but I do, and it has a lot to do with the complexity of the construction of the idea. Not necessarily the making, because the making can be exquisite or really crappy, depending on the idea. But it's, and now what I do is I'm like a total, I study history on my own. I read a ton of stuff. I listen to podcasts, not so much podcasts, more books, YouTube channels that have verifiable scholars on them. And I know from the old days how to cross-check sources and how to read multiple, it's like art. You read multiple artists on the same topic and you decide who do you think does the best job, So please, all of you, don't believe that they won't welcome you. A lot of it is internalized fear. I still have it. If I can get rid of that fear by the time I'm gone, that might be good. I like that. Because I don't think we're going anywhere. I think this is it. So the most learning and growing we can do as individuals, looking at where we came from, what we got. Thank you very much. You didn't do that great a job, but did the best you could. We're all coming from a different place. But to have access at a really high level, I think is what we want. So I don't want it to be not a high level anymore. And we can argue about what that means, because that's a great argument. But I just believe in you're here and you're a grad student. So yeah, you got it. I mean, it might feel crappy, but you guys, not all of you, because I can see some gray hairs. You guys of a certain age, it's crappy. It feels like shit a lot of the time. Growing is extremely hard. It really sucks, I'm telling you. But when you realize you've changed in the course of a couple of years, or suddenly you're not like having nightmares about what you did today, it's like, oh my God, I'm over that hump. I made it. I see the world differently. I'm a part of this. And that, when you're in that position, you become powerful. You become one of the people who could put a hand out and say, okay, here, let me tell you how this works. Let me disclose everything. Right? That's why I say you can ask me anything. So good luck. You got it.
I'm sorry. I'll keep it light. Thank you for your presentation. I loved it. I was curious about the comment you made regarding how you select projects and how architecture plays a role in what makes a project interesting, clearly, because your work is so dependent on structure.
Yeah.
And given that you are essentially creating an environment within an environment, oftentimes, I'm curious if you have a dream environment that you'd like to fill with your crochet.
There are a couple of institutions I would be like, I'd like to do you.
Yeah,
You know?
I was curious, and just
I'm not going to say that out loud, though.
also, just how do you reconcile loose ends?
How do I reconcile?
Like loose ends of shoelaces or rubber or paracord.
Oh, I love loose ends. Sometimes I wrap them up and sometimes I just let them go. You know, the loose ends are, you know, I look for all kinds of gates to the work. I don't know, are you familiar with thinking about artwork that way? Sometimes it'll be a picture. Somebody will be like, oh, I recognize that. That looks like my Aunt Matilda, or I crochet, or that's a kneeler. I know what to do with that, although you're not allowed to kneel on it. Like, there's certain things that will be completely recognizable to some people and alien to others. Physically, a lot of times, literally a loose end is like, don't you just want to pull on that? Kind of, I have a little cathect moment, like, ooh, that's just so. You either respond to it as a naughty 10-year-old or a 4-year-old, or, you know, want to take a scissor to the whole thing. I don't know. You might hate it, then you take the scissor to it, but you're not allowed, so that protects me and my vision. You're right about the architecture. It's hard to make the simple white box interesting, and to be honest, I don't really want to anymore. I'd rather make a discrete object, like, so you'll see some work in this show that are discrete, like literally wall hangings, like in the old-fashioned way. And that's fine with me, that will last, and it's just another kind of thing. But if it's got weird stuff going on inside, I'm really into it. Like, you'll see, I used that weird ledge. I'm sure that was for some like marble sculpture or something, right? Like because it's a little high, and the architect made a lot of fascinating decisions in this building.
And with that, should we all move into the gallery and continue the discussion? Thank you, Sheila.
Thanks, guys.